Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I'll never forget the day my parents handed my business, my baby, over to my sister, all because they thought she had more potential. They tricked me into signing papers I didn't understand, taking everything I'd built. But there was one thing they didn't count on. I kept all the recipes. When they tried to run the business without me, it was a disaster. Here's how it all went down. It was a crisp morning when my parents called me into their dining room, which they always referred to as the meeting space whenever something serious was about to go down. The long oak table was cleared, save for a neat stack of papers resting in the middle. My dad was sitting at the head, his fingers tapping a rhythm against his coffee mug, while my mom hovered near the window, staring out at the garden like she was deep in thought. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents had always been involved in my bakery, sometimes to an annoying degree. They'd stop by unannounced, making suggestions that ranged from mildly helpful to downright ridiculous. My dad once suggested I bake cakes shaped like famous landmarks. Think of the Instagram potential, he'd said, as though my target audience cared more about novelty than quality. Still, I thought this would be another one of those lectures about taking things to the next level. I walked in, expecting a pep talk about expansion or marketing strategies. What I didn't expect was the serious tone in my dad's voice when he gestured for me to sit. The bakery had been my life for the past 6 years. It started as a tiny passion project, just me and a countertop mixer in my studio apartment. I poured every spare dollar and every ounce of energy into it, working 16-hour days to perfect my recipes and win over customers. Eventually, my hard work paid off. I moved into a small storefront, built a loyal following, and turned a profit. At first, my parents were proud. They loved bragging to their friends about their entrepreneurial daughter who was doing something she loved. But as the business grew more successful, their pride started to shift into something else, control. It started small. My mom would call me after visiting the bakery and say things like, the display case looks a little cluttered. Have you thought about rearranging it? My dad would suggest I add more savory items to the menu because not everyone likes sweets. At first, I humored them. They were my parents, after all, and I appreciated their interest in what I was doing. But their advice became more frequent, and their tone more insistent. Soon, every family dinner turned into a brainstorming session for changes I didn't ask for and didn't want. That morning, my dad slid the stack of papers across the table toward me, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "These are just some formalities," he said, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Legal stuff to protect the family business." "Family business?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "It's my business." Of course, my mom chimed in, sitting down beside him. "But we're thinking about the bigger picture. You're so busy, and you've done an amazing job so far. But managing all of this alone can't be easy. We just want to make sure everything is set up for long-term success." I frowned, picking up the first sheet of paper. It was filled with legal jargon I didn't fully understand, but my dad quickly pointed to the highlighted areas. "This is just giving us some oversight," he explained. "You'll still run the bakery, but we'll handle the logistical stuff. It'll take some of the weight off your shoulders." My gut told me something wasn't right, but I pushed the thought aside. These were my parents. Why would they steer me wrong? I skimmed through the stack, trying to make sense of terms like operational management and ownership restructuring. My dad chuckled, sensing my hesitation. "Don't worry, kiddo. It's nothing major," he said, patting my hand. "It's just to make sure everything's in order as the business grows. You trust us, don't you?" Of course, I trusted them. They were my parents. They'd supported me from the start, helped me when I struggled, and celebrated my wins. Why wouldn't I trust them? "Okay," I said finally, grabbing a pen. "Where do I sign?" My mom smiled warmly, handing me the pen like it was an honor. "This is for the best, sweetheart. You'll see." As I scribbled my name on each page, a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered that I should read more carefully. But I brushed it off, chalking it up to paranoia. Afterward, my parents seemed oddly pleased. My dad clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You won't regret this. We're going to make the bakery even better." My mom beamed, saying she'd already been brainstorming ideas for modernizing the brand. I left the house feeling uneasy, but told myself it was just nerves. Change was always uncomfortable, and maybe this would actually help lighten my workload. If only I'd known that in signing those papers, I wasn't just giving them oversight. I was signing away everything I'd worked for. I should have known better. The weight of that realization still presses on me when I think back to that day. I should have taken my time, read every line, and asked questions. But in the moment, I didn't. They were my parents. Why would I doubt their intentions? I remember staring at those papers, the lines of legal jargon blurring together. My dad stood over my shoulder, his tone casual but insistent. "This is just standard stuff," he said, pointing at a section marked with a yellow sticky note. "It's about liability and future-proofing the business. You'll still be in charge. This is just paperwork." I skimmed the pages, trusting his reassurance. After all, hadn't they been supportive? They'd helped me get the bakery off the ground when I first started. They bragged about my success to friends and proudly introduced me as their entrepreneurial daughter. Why would they have anything but my best interests at heart? Over the next few weeks, everything seemed normal. I dove back into the daily grind, juggling orders, developing new recipes, and managing my growing team. The bakery was thriving, and I felt like I was finally hitting my stride. My parents began dropping by more frequently, always armed with unsolicited advice. At first, I didn't think much of it. They'd been hovering ever since the bakery started gaining traction. My mom would rearrange the front display without asking, claiming it would look more inviting. My dad loved lecturing me about upselling techniques, despite having no experience in retail. Then they started bringing my sister, Emily, along with them. Emily and I had always had a strained relationship. She was the golden child, straight-A student, Ivy League grad, the one who could do no wrong. While I was baking cookies in a cramped apartment, she was earning a business degree and landing prestigious internships. "She has such a good eye for business," my dad said one afternoon, watching Emily inspect the bakery like she was appraising it. "She could be a real asset to you. She's just here to learn," my mom added quickly, smiling too much. In case she ever wants to do something like this herself. At the time, I didn't think much of it. If anything, I felt a little flattered. Maybe Emily was finally taking an interest in what I'd built. She'd never shown much enthusiasm for the bakery before, so the idea of her wanting to learn from me felt like a small victory. She started visiting more often, offering suggestions that sounded rehearsed, like she was reciting lines from a textbook. "You should consider cutting costs on packaging," she said one day, holding up one of my carefully designed boxes. "Customers don't care about that stuff as much as you think. That box is part of the experience," I replied, biting back my frustration. "It's what makes my brand unique." Emily shrugged, clearly unimpressed. "It's just something to think about." Her presence was grating, but I brushed it off as harmless. At least she wasn't openly criticizing me, which felt like progress in our rocky sibling dynamic. What I didn't realize was that my parents were setting the stage for something far bigger. Little by little, they were positioning Emily as an integral part of the business, planting the idea that she was the key to taking it to the next level. Looking back, there were so many red flags. The way my dad casually mentioned how impressive Emily's business background was. The way my mom kept pointing out areas where the bakery could benefit from fresh ideas. Even Emily's growing confidence, as if she already had a stake in what I'd built. But I was too focused on running the bakery to connect the dots. I was overwhelmed with orders, struggling to keep up with demand, and trying to make sure every customer left happy. I didn't have the time or energy to second-guess my parents' intentions. The truth hit me weeks later, but by then, it was too late. I was reorganizing the office when I stumbled across a copy of the paperwork I'd signed. Something about the wording caught my eye. Phrases like transfer of operational authority and restructuring of ownership. My stomach sank as I read through it more carefully this time. The documents clearly outlined a transfer of ownership to my parents, giving them full control over the bakery. And what's worse, there was a clause allowing them to reassign that control to a third party. No questions asked. I stared at the page, my hands shaking. How had I missed this? How could I have been so blind? I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that my parents hadn't meant to deceive me. But as I pieced everything together, their increased involvement, Emily's sudden interest, the subtle hints about long-term plans, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a coincidence. They were planning something, and I had handed them the keys to everything I'd worked for. The smell of lemon and lavender still lingers in my memory when I think back to that afternoon. It was a busy Tuesday, and I had just pulled a tray of my signature muffins from the oven. The bakery was warm and bustling, with the quiet hum of conversation from the cafe section and the steady clink of coffee cups as customers lingered over their orders. I was wiping my hands on a towel, already mentally preparing for the lunch rush, when the door chimed. My parents walked in, followed closely by my sister, Emily. They weren't smiling like they usually did. My dad's face was unreadable, but my mom's lips were pressed into a tight line. Emily, on the other hand, looked almost smug, as if she already knew something I didn't. "We need to talk," my dad said, gesturing toward the office. His tone was clipped. All business. My mom lingered near the counter, chatting with Emily in a way that felt too casual, like they were deliberately trying to act normal. The second the office door closed behind us, I knew something was wrong. My dad leaned against the desk, avoiding my gaze, while my mom stayed conspicuously silent. "What's going on?" I asked, glancing between them. My dad took a deep breath, rubbing his hands together like he was about to deliver bad news he'd been rehearsing in his head. "We've been thinking a lot about the future of the bakery," he began. My stomach tightened. "Okay, and we've decided it's best for the family if Emily takes over," he said quickly, as if saying it fast would make it hurt less. I blinked, convinced I hadn't heard him right. "Excuse me?" "She has more potential," he continued, still not looking at me. "She's been studying business. She has the tools to take this bakery to the next level. It just makes sense." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. "You're joking," I said finally, my voice cracking. "No," my mom chimed in, her tone soft but firm. "We're not. Sweetheart, you've done an amazing job getting the bakery off the ground, but running a business is about more than just baking. It's about strategy and vision, and Emily has that." My throat tightened. "This is my bakery," I said, barely able to get the words out. "I built it. I've been running it for 6 years. And now you're just handing it to Emily?" My dad finally met my eyes, but there was no remorse there, just that practiced look of parental authority. "It's not about taking it away from you. It's about what's best for the family." I let out a bitter laugh. Best for the family? Or best for Emily? They didn't answer. My dad just handed me a folder, the same kind they'd given me weeks earlier. "This outlines the transition," he said. "You'll still have a role in the bakery. You can focus on what you're best at, baking. Let Emily handle the rest." My hands shook as I opened the folder and scanned the contents. It was all there in black and white, a formalized plan to transfer ownership to Emily. My name was reduced to a footnote, a consulting role with no real authority. "This can't be legal," I said, throwing the folder onto the desk. "It is," my dad said, his tone flat. "You signed the papers. We made sure everything was above board." My heart dropped. The documents. The ones I'd signed without reading. I'd given them the power to do this, and they'd wasted no time taking advantage of it. I stormed out of the office, barely able to see through my anger. My mom was standing by the counter, chatting with Emily, who was flipping through one of my menus like she already owned the place. "You knew about this," I said, my voice trembling as I looked at Emily. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a half-smile. "Of course I did. They've been talking to me about it for weeks. I thought you'd be happy. Now you can focus on what you love without all the stress of running the business." I stared at her, trying to process the audacity of her words. "This is what I love? Running this bakery is what I love, and you're stealing it from me?" Emily rolled her eyes. "No one's stealing anything. I'm just taking it to the next level. You should be thanking me." I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, the chime echoing behind me like the sound of everything I'd worked for slipping away. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the silence of a space that now felt foreign. I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, each word cutting deeper than the last. My parents' betrayal, Emily's smugness. It was all too much. But as the hours passed, my anger started to shift into something else. Determination. They might have taken the bakery, but they hadn't taken me. I still had my recipes, my skills, and my creativity. If they thought they could run my bakery without me, they were in for a rude awakening. They'd started a war, and they didn't even know it yet. I stood frozen in the bakery office, staring at my parents and sister as if they had just confessed to a crime, which in my mind they had. "Take over the business?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about? This is my bakery." The weight of my words hung in the air, but they didn't seem to land with my parents. My mom crossed her arms, her expression that practiced mix of sympathy and condescension. "Honey, this is what's best for everyone," she said, her voice calm and measured, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. "Best for who?" I shot back, anger rising in my chest. "Certainly not for me. We're thinking long-term," my dad interjected, his voice taking on the same patronizing tone. "Emily has the business background. She knows how to scale this bakery into something bigger. You can still work here, focus on the baking. That's your strength." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, the people who had once bragged about my success to anyone who would listen, were now treating me like an employee in my own business. I felt like I'd stepped into some kind of alternate reality where everything I'd worked for belonged to someone else. And then they showed me the papers. My dad slid the folder across the desk, his expression neutral. "You signed these," he said, tapping the cover. With trembling hands, I flipped through the documents. They were the same ones I'd skimmed weeks ago, the ones my parents had assured me were just formalities. But now, I could see the truth. The papers outlined a full transfer of ownership to my parents, granting them complete control over the business. And at the bottom of the final page was my signature. I felt the ground shift beneath me. "No," I said, shaking my head. "This can't be real. I didn't sign away my business. I would never." "You did," my dad interrupted, his tone firm. "You signed it over to us. We've already transferred ownership to Emily." The room started to spin. "Transferred ownership?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" My mom stepped forward, her hands outstretched as if to comfort me. "Sweetheart, this is what's best for the bakery," she said. "Emily has the skills to take it to the next level. You've done an amazing job getting it this far, but now it's time to think about the future." I jerked away from her. "The future? You mean her future? What about mine? This is my bakery. I built it." Emily, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "Look, this isn't personal," she said, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. "But you're too close to it. You're great at baking, but running a business is about more than that. You don't have the experience or the education to handle what comes next." Her words hit like a slap. "You've never even set foot in a kitchen," I snapped. "You think a degree means you can run a bakery? This isn't some corporate job. It's my life." Emily shrugged, clearly unbothered. "That's why you're still part of the team," she said, as if that were some kind of consolation. "You'll focus on what you're good at, and I'll handle the big picture stuff." I couldn't listen to another word. The betrayal was too overwhelming, too raw. I pushed past them and walked out of the office, out of the bakery, and into the cool afternoon air. For the next few hours, I wandered aimlessly, my mind racing. How could they do this to me? How could my own family betray me like this? Every time I thought about the papers I'd signed, I felt a fresh wave of anger. At them, but also at myself. I trusted them, and now I was paying the price. When I finally made it home, I collapsed onto my couch, too exhausted to cry. My phone buzzed with texts from my mom, but I didn't bother reading them. I already knew what they would say: justifications, platitudes, and empty reassurances. None of it mattered. The next day, I returned to the bakery, determined to fight for what was mine. But when I walked through the door, it didn't feel like my space anymore. My mom and dad were already there, talking with Emily about plans to rebrand. They barely acknowledged me as I slipped into the kitchen, my sanctuary in the chaos. As I worked through the day, kneading dough and measuring ingredients, I realized I couldn't stay. This wasn't my bakery anymore. Not legally and not emotionally. Staying would mean accepting their betrayal, and I couldn't do that. That evening, after the last customer left, I packed up my things. I grabbed my recipe book, the one I'd poured my heart into over the years, and walked out without saying a word. They had taken my bakery, but they hadn't taken my creativity, my passion, or my recipes. And they were about to find out just how much those things mattered. For days, I teetered on the edge of doing something drastic. I wanted to fight, call a lawyer, file a lawsuit, and blast their betrayal on every social media platform I could think of. I spent sleepless nights researching legal options, only to hit wall after wall. The papers I'd signed were airtight, carefully worded to leave me with no recourse. It was infuriating. The betrayal was bad enough, but the helplessness was worse. I had built that bakery from scratch, and now it belonged to people who had no idea what it took to run it. My parents, who had never spent a single sleepless night baking or balancing the books, had handed it over to Emily, who could barely differentiate between a rolling pin and a whisk. But the harsh reality was undeniable. I didn't have the money to hire a lawyer, let alone fight a prolonged legal battle. They had me cornered, and they knew it. The realization left me gutted, but it also forced me to make a decision. I had to leave. Walking away was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was a part of me. Every corner of that space held memories. The countertop where I'd rolled out my first batch of croissants, the oven I'd saved for months to buy, the display case where I'd proudly arranged my first creations. I packed my things late one evening, long after the last customer had left and the lights in the front had dimmed. As I worked, the sounds of the bakery, the hum of the fridge, the faint creak of the floors felt like a bittersweet goodbye. But as heart-wrenching as it was, I knew I wasn't leaving empty-handed. Before I walked out that door for the last time, I made one small, crucial decision. I took my recipe book. The book wasn't just a collection of instructions. It was my lifeline. Every page held the secrets that had made the bakery what it was. The perfect ratio of lemon to lavender, the exact temperature for a flaky crust, the little tweaks that turned ordinary ingredients into extraordinary creations. I tucked the book into my bag, its worn leather cover a comforting weight. Without it, the bakery was just a shell, a building full of ovens and counters, but devoid of its soul. My parents and Emily could keep the space, the equipment, and even the name, but the heart of the business was leaving with me. I wasn't sure if they even realized how much they needed those recipes. To them, running the bakery was about numbers and marketing, about strategy and scaling up. They saw it as a product, something to package and sell. But they didn't understand the artistry behind it, the delicate balance of science and intuition that made my baked goods special. And without that artistry, I knew they were doomed. The fallout came quicker than I expected. At first, they seemed confident, posting on social media about the bakery's exciting new direction and Emily's visionary leadership. I watched from a distance, half curious and half nauseated by their blatant self-congratulation. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Customers started complaining almost immediately. The croissants were too dense, the muffins dry, the cakes overly sweet. Loyal patrons who had been coming to my bakery for years began leaving negative reviews, expressing their disappointment at the sudden drop in quality. "I don't know what happened," one customer wrote on Yelp, "but the bakery isn't the same anymore. The pastries taste off. Behind the scenes, things were even worse." I still had a few friends on the staff, and they weren't shy about filling me in. Emily had no idea what she was doing. She tried to reverse engineer my recipes, but without understanding the nuances, the results were disastrous. "She's running this place into the ground." One of my former co-workers texted me late one night. "She thinks she can just guess her way through it, but it's a mess. Customers are walking out." My parents were scrambling to do damage control, offering discounts and promotions to lure customers back, but nothing worked. The bakery's reputation, built over years of hard work, was unraveling in a matter of weeks. At first, I felt a twinge of guilt. As much as they had betrayed me, the bakery had been my dream, and watching it fail was painful. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't my failure, it was theirs. They had taken something they didn't understand, stripped it of what made it special, and expected it to thrive. One afternoon, I walked past the bakery on my way to run errands. The windows, once bright and inviting, now looked dim and unkempt. A sign in the window advertised a buy one, get one free deal, something I would have never resorted to. As I stood there, a customer exited the bakery, shaking her head. "It's not the same," I overheard her say to a friend. "It's like they don't even know what they're doing." Her words stung, but they also validated what I already knew. Without me, the bakery was nothing. Walking away from that bakery had been the hardest decision of my life, but in the end, it was the right one. They could have the space, the equipment, and the name, but they couldn't replicate what I had built. And as I held my recipe book in my hands that evening, I realized something else. I still had everything I needed to start over. They might have taken my bakery, but they hadn't taken my talent, my creativity, or my passion. They thought they had won, but they were about to learn the hard way that you can't steal someone's heart and soul. And that's exactly what my recipes were. The decline began almost immediately. A few weeks after I left, I started hearing whispers about how things weren't the same at the bakery. Loyal customers, the ones who used to line up before the doors even opened, were complaining about the quality of the baked goods. At first, I dismissed it as wishful thinking, a flicker of hope that maybe the universe had a sense of justice. But the whispers grew louder, and soon, they turned into full-blown public outcry. The first real sign of trouble came when a friend texted me a screenshot of a one-star review on Yelp. "This place used to be my favorite bakery in town," it read. "I don't know what happened, but the bread is dry, the cakes are bland, and the pastries taste like they came out of a grocery store freezer. What a disappointment." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Emily, with all her business degrees and potential, had underestimated the importance of the thing she thought was irrelevant: my recipes. From what I heard, Emily had tried everything to salvage the bakery's reputation. She spent hours in the kitchen, attempting to reverse engineer my recipes, but her lack of skill and understanding was painfully evident. The bread lacked the airy, delicate texture that came from years of perfecting the fermentation process. The cakes were either too dense or too dry because she didn't understand how humidity affected the batter. And the pastries? Let's just say folding butter into dough wasn't as simple as it looked on YouTube. Customers noticed immediately. The one steady stream of glowing Instagram posts featuring my lemon lavender muffins and chocolate croissants slowed to a trickle. Instead, the bakery's tags were filled with complaints. They ruined my favorite spot. One post read, accompanied by a sad photo of a lackluster croissant. Another simply said, "This isn't the same bakery anymore." The worst blow came when a local food blogger, who had once written a glowing review of my bakery, returned for a follow-up visit. She had been one of my biggest supporters, and her praise had brought in a wave of new customers during my early days. Her second review was brutal. "It's hard to believe this is the same bakery I once raved about," she wrote. "The pastries are uninspired, the flavors flat, and the attention to detail that once made this place special is gone. Whatever changes have been made here, they're not for the better." Her words hit hard, not just for Emily and my parents, but for me too. I had built that reputation brick by brick, one satisfied customer at a time, and now it was crumbling under their mismanagement. Behind the scenes, things were even worse. My former coworkers who had stayed on after the ownership change started reaching out to me with updates. They described a chaotic environment where Emily barked orders but couldn't deliver results. She implemented cost-cutting measures that backfired spectacularly, switching to cheaper ingredients, shortening proofing times, and reducing staff hours. "She doesn't get it," one of my old bakers said during a late-night call. "She thinks it's all about margins, but you can't run a bakery like that." Customers notice. They care about quality. Even my parents, who had once been so confident in Emily's abilities, were starting to panic. My dad sent out mass emails offering discounts and promotions, while my mom tried to rally their dwindling customer base with posts about exciting new changes coming to the menu. None of it worked. Meanwhile, I kept my distance. It wasn't easy. I'd poured my heart into that bakery, and watching it fall apart was like watching someone destroy a piece of me. But at the same time, it felt like justice. My parents and Emily had stolen something I loved, thinking they could replicate my success without understanding what made it special. Now, they were reaping the consequences of their arrogance. One day, as I walked through town, I passed by the bakery. The windows, once filled with inviting displays of pastries and cakes, were nearly bare. A handwritten sign in the window advertised a desperate 50% off all items sale. I paused for a moment, watching as a lone customer left the store empty-handed, shaking their head. "It's not the same anymore," I overheard them say to someone on the phone. "I don't think I'll be going back." It should have felt triumphant, but it didn't. As much as I wanted to revel in their failure, it also hurt to see the bakery reduced to a shadow of what it once was. That place had been my dream, my sanctuary, and now it was a cautionary tale of what happens when greed and incompetence take over. Still, I knew I had made the right decision. By walking away, I had reclaimed my freedom, my creativity, and my dignity. And as much as it hurt to see the bakery burn, I also knew it wasn't my fire to put out. From afar, I watched as the business they'd stolen from me crumbled into nothing, knowing that the ashes would never be mine to clean up. While my family was busy driving the bakery into the ground, I was quietly laying the foundation for something new. It wasn't easy starting over. I had poured so much of myself into the bakery that losing it felt like losing a part of my identity. But if there was one thing I still had, it was my passion for baking. That passion had carried me through the darkest moments before, and I knew it would again. The first step was finding a space where I could bake. My tiny apartment kitchen was too small, so I rented a modest commercial kitchen on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a few ovens, a prep table, and some storage racks, but it was mine. No parents, no sister, no one to interfere. When I unlocked the door for the first time, I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. It wasn't as shiny or as polished as the bakery I'd built, but it was a blank canvas. I pulled out my recipe book, the same one I'd taken from the bakery, and flipped through the pages. Here, I could start fresh, free from the weight of my family's betrayal. I began small, just like I had in the beginning. I baked in batches, testing the waters with a few trusted recipes. My signature lemon lavender muffins, buttery croissants, and decadent chocolate tarts. I packaged them neatly, labeling each item with a simple, handwritten tag. There was no branding, no flashy logo, just my baked goods and the hope that someone would recognize their quality. I signed up for a few local farmers markets, paying the booth fees out of my dwindling savings. Setting up that first table was nerve-wracking. I didn't know if people would even stop by, let alone buy anything. But as the morning sun rose and the market filled with shoppers, I saw the first signs of hope. "Wait," a woman said, picking up one of my muffins. "These taste just like the ones from that bakery downtown. Did you used to work there?" I smiled, choosing my words carefully. You could say that. I was the baker there. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. By the time the second market rolled around, people were coming specifically to find me. I've been looking everywhere for these, one customer said, holding up a box of croissants. They're better than anything else in town. Soon, I was taking custom orders for birthdays, weddings, and events. I deliver cakes to people's homes, often hearing the same refrain. I'm so glad you're back. The most surreal moment came when a former regular from the bakery called me directly. I don't know what's going on at the old place, she said, but it's terrible now. I don't care what it takes. I want your baking. That call solidified what I already knew. My customers weren't loyal to a building or a name. They were loyal to the heart and soul I put into my craft. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. Without my family's interference, I could bake what I wanted, experiment with new recipes, and focus on making people happy. I didn't have to compromise on quality or cut corners to meet someone else's vision. I also rediscovered the joy of baking. It wasn't just about running a business anymore. It was about creating something meaningful. When I rolled out dough in the quiet of the early morning or watched golden pastries rise in the oven, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. Still, I kept my new venture under wraps. I didn't post on social media, didn't put up signs, and didn't advertise beyond word of mouth. The last thing I needed was my parents or Emily catching wind of what I was doing. For now, it was enough to know that people recognized my work and were willing to seek it out. Each week, my following grew. My customer list expanded, my orders increased, and my confidence returned. I realized that I didn't need a fancy storefront or a massive operation to succeed. All I needed were my recipes, my passion, and the people who appreciated them. One evening, after a particularly successful market, I sat down with a cup of tea and scrolled through the photos I'd taken that day. The sight of smiling customers holding my baked goods filled me with pride. This was what I'd been missing, a genuine connection with the people who loved what I made. Starting over wasn't just about rebuilding my business. It was about reclaiming my identity. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It wasn't flashy or grand, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. It was a sunny Saturday morning at the market, the kind of day where everything felt a little brighter, a little more hopeful. My booth was bustling, as it had been for weeks now. Customers chatted as they browsed my display of pastries and cakes, and the air was filled with the rich aroma of butter and sugar. I had just handed a customer their box of lemon lavender muffins when I spotted her, Emily. She stood a few stalls away, scanning the crowd like she was searching for something. When her eyes landed on me, her expression shifted from cautious determination to something close to desperation. For a moment, I froze, unsure of how to react. But then she started walking toward me, and I felt a wave of anger rise in my chest. "Hi," she said when she reached the booth, her voice shaky but trying to sound composed. She looked out of place in her tailored blazer and designer shoes, standing among the casual chaos of the market. "What are you doing here, Emily?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, even though I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. She hesitated, glancing at the customers milling around my booth. "Can we talk? Privately?" I crossed my arms. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it here." Her face flushed, but she pressed on. "Fine. Look, the bakery isn't doing well. Customers are leaving, sales are down, and we're barely staying afloat. Mom and Dad think, well, we all think you should come back." I let out a bitter laugh, loud enough to draw the attention of a few nearby shoppers. "Come back?" I repeated. "You mean to the bakery you stole from me?" Emily flinched, but quickly recovered. "We didn't steal anything. You signed the papers, remember? And it's not about that. This is about saving the business." Her words only fueled my anger. "The business doesn't need saving. You do. You and Mom and Dad. You thought you could take what I built, strip it of everything that made it special, and still succeed. And now you're surprised it's failing." Emily's composure began to crack. "We didn't realize how much people liked your recipes," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "They keep asking for the old stuff, and we don't know how to make it the way you did." "So what?" I said, my tone icy. "You thought I'd just come running back to fix your mess? After everything you did to me?" Emily sighed, looking down at the ground. "I'm sorry," she said softly, but the words felt hollow. "We didn't mean for things to get this bad. We need your help." I stared at her, trying to gauge if she was being genuine or just desperate. Either way, it didn't matter. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you and I both know the bakery was never yours to begin with. You and Mom and Dad took it from me because you thought you could do it better. Now you're realizing that you can't, and you expect me to bail you out." Her eyes darted around, as if hoping for a lifeline. It's not like that. We can make this right. You can come back, take over the baking, and we'll figure something out together. I shook my head, a sense of finality settling over me. No thanks, I said, picking up a tray of freshly baked croissants and placing them on the counter. I've already moved on, and I'm doing just fine without you. Emily stood there for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then her expression hardened, and she turned on her heel, storming off without another word. I watched her go, my emotions swirling in a mix of anger, relief, and something that almost felt like triumph. The confrontation had been inevitable, but it wasn't until that moment that I realized how much power I still held. For months, I had let their betrayal define me. I had replayed every cruel word, every dismissive action, letting it fester into self-doubt. But standing there in my own booth, surrounded by customers who loved what I made, I felt something shift. I didn't owe them anything, not after what they'd done. That day, I worked with a renewed sense of purpose. Every croissant I sold, every thank you I received from a customer felt like a small victory, not just against my family, but for myself. Emily's visit had lit a fire under me. It reminded me why I had started over, why I had fought so hard to reclaim my identity. I wasn't just a baker. I was the heart and soul of what made my creation special. And no one, not even my own family, could take that away from me. As the market wound down and I packed up my booth, I felt lighter than I had in months. Emily's desperation wasn't my burden to carry. I had my own path now, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The end came faster than I expected. For months, the bakery stumbled along like a wounded animal, dragging itself through the motions, but never recovering. The signs were everywhere. Empty display cases by mid-afternoon, half-hearted social media posts begging for customer support, and discount after discount in a desperate attempt to bring in foot traffic. I watched it all from a distance, hearing updates from mutual acquaintances and former customers who would come to my booth at the market. "It's so sad what's happened to that bakery," one woman told me as she picked up a box of croissants. "It used to be my favorite place, but it's just not the same anymore." She wasn't the only one. Each week, more people stopped by, sharing similar stories about how the bakery had gone downhill. The bread was bland, the pastries lacked finesse, and the overall experience felt soulless. "They're trying," one man said with a shrug, "but it's obvious they don't know what they're doing." The final nail in the coffin came when they tried to rebrand. My parents, in their infinite wisdom, decided that a new logo and some flashy packaging would somehow solve their problems. They posted about it on social media like it was a grand relaunch, hyping up the exciting new chapter of the bakery. It flopped spectacularly. The new branding felt cold and corporate, completely out of touch with what had made the bakery special in the first place. The reviews grew even harsher, with former customers accusing them of trying to mask their failings with superficial changes. "They think a new logo can fix bad bread?" one review read. "Maybe they should focus on hiring someone who actually knows how to bake." Despite their efforts, the damage was irreversible. The bakery's reputation, once built on years of hard work and care, had been shredded beyond repair. My parents, of course, refused to take responsibility. Instead, they pointed fingers in every direction except their own. "It's the economy," my dad said when a family friend asked about the decline. "People just aren't spending money on luxuries like they used to." My mom blamed the customers, saying they were too picky and didn't appreciate the effort Emily was putting in. Emily, for her part, tried to deflect attention away from her own incompetence by claiming the location was the problem. Privately, though, I think they knew the truth. Without my recipes, they had nothing. They had underestimated how much of the bakery's success was tied to the quality of the products, the care that went into every loaf of bread and every tray of pastries. And that quality had always come from me. When the bakery finally closed, I felt complicated. I'd spent so many nights imagining this moment, picturing myself feeling triumphant as the people who had betrayed me got what they deserved. But now that it had happened, triumph wasn't the word I'd use. Mostly, I felt relief. The bakery had been a part of my life for so long, and seeing it mismanaged and degraded had been like watching someone destroy a piece of my soul. Now at least it was over. My parents and Emily could no longer use me or my work for their gain. That chapter of my life was closed, and with it, the weight of their betrayal began to lift. Meanwhile, my own business was thriving. The small operation I'd started in the rented kitchen had grown steadily over the months. I added more farmers markets to my schedule, started catering events, and even began taking online orders. Customers loved the personal touch I brought to my baking. the handwritten thank you notes, the care I put into every package. It wasn't just about the money, though that was nice too. It was about rebuilding something that felt authentically mine. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a reminder that my success wasn't tied to a physical space or a family name. It came from my talent, my creativity, and my passion. One evening, as I sat in my little kitchen putting the finishing touches on a batch of holiday cookies, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The bakery had been my dream for so long, but losing it had forced me to reimagine what success looked like. What I had now wasn't as big or as flashy, but it was mine. Every decision, every recipe, every customer interaction was rooted in my vision, not someone else's. And that made it better than anything I could have imagined. They had tried to take everything from me, but I'd built something even better in its place. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. The end came faster than I expected. For months, the bakery stumbled along like a wounded animal, dragging itself through the motions but never recovering. The signs were everywhere. Empty display cases by mid-afternoon, half-hearted social media posts begging for customer support, and discount after discount in a desperate attempt to bring in foot traffic. I watched it all from a distance, hearing updates from mutual acquaintances and former customers who would come to my booth at the market. It's so sad what's happened to that bakery, one woman told me as she picked up a box of croissants. It used to be my favorite place, but it's just not the same anymore. She wasn't the only one. Each week, more people stopped by, sharing similar stories about how the bakery had gone downhill. The bread was bland, the pastries lacked finesse, and the overall experience felt soulless. They're trying, one man said with a shrug, but it's obvious they don't know what they're doing. The final nail in the coffin came when they tried to rebrand. My parents, in their infinite wisdom, decided that a new logo and some flashy packaging would somehow solve their problems. They posted about it on social media like it was a grand relaunch, hyping up the exciting new chapter of the bakery. It flopped spectacularly. The new branding felt cold and corporate, completely out of touch with what had made the bakery special in the first place. The reviews grew even harsher, with former customers accusing them of trying to mask their failings with superficial changes. They think a new logo can fix bad bread? One review read. Maybe they should focus on hiring someone who actually knows how to bake. Despite their efforts, the damage was irreversible. The bakery's reputation, once built on years of hard work and care, had been shredded beyond repair. My parents, of course, refused to take responsibility. Instead, they pointed fingers in every direction except their own. It's the economy, my dad said when a family friend asked about the decline. People just aren't spending money on luxuries like they used to. My mom blamed the customers, saying they were too picky and didn't appreciate the effort Emily was putting in. Emily, for her part, tried to deflect attention away from her own incompetence by claiming the location was the problem. Privately, though, I think they knew the truth. Without my recipes, they had nothing. They had underestimated how much of the bakery's success was tied to the quality of the products, the care that went into every loaf of bread and every tray of pastries. And that quality had always come from me. When the bakery finally closed, I felt complicated. I'd spent so many nights imagining this moment, picturing myself feeling triumphant as the people who had betrayed me got what they deserved. But now that it had happened, triumph wasn't the word I'd use. Mostly, I felt relief. The bakery had been a part of my life for so long, and seeing it mismanaged and degraded had been like watching someone destroy a piece of my soul. Now at least it was over. My parents and Emily could no longer use me, or my work for their gain. That chapter of my life was closed, and with it, the weight of their betrayal began to lift. Meanwhile, my own business was thriving. The small operation I'd started in the rented kitchen had grown steadily over the months. I added more farmers markets to my schedule, started catering events, and even began taking online orders. Customers loved the personal touch I brought to my baking, the handwritten thank you notes, the care I put into every package. It wasn't just about the money, though that was nice too. It was about rebuilding something that felt authentically mine. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a reminder that my success wasn't tied to a physical space or a family name. It came from my talent, my creativity, and my passion. One evening, as I sat in my little kitchen putting the finishing touches on a batch of holiday cookies, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The bakery had been my dream for so long, but losing it had forced me to reimagine what success looked like. What I had now wasn't as big or as flashy, but it was mine. Every decision, every recipe, Every customer interaction was rooted in my vision, not someone else's. And that made it better than anything I could have imagined. They had tried to take everything from me, but I'd built something even better in its place. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Today, I'm living my dream again, but on my own terms. My bakery is thriving, and I've built something that's truly mine. As for my family, we're distant. They taught me a hard lesson about trust, but they also showed me how resilient I am. To anyone out there who's been betrayed, let me say this. Sometimes, losing everything is the best thing that can happen to you. It gives you the chance to rebuild stronger than before. And when you do, your success will speak louder than their betrayal ever could. ChatGPT. Chapter 10. Moving on. Today, my life looks entirely different than it did when I first started this journey. My new bakery, housed in a small but charming storefront I leased just a few months ago, has become my sanctuary. The aroma of fresh bread and pastries fills the air each morning as customers line up outside, some of them regulars who've been following me since the farmers market days. I named this place Haven and Hearth, a name that feels like a reflection of everything I've worked to build. It's warm, inviting, and personal. Everything my old bakery lost under my family's control. Every detail, from the hand-painted sign outside to the carefully curated menu, is a reminder that this time, it's all mine. Walking into the kitchen every day, I feel a sense of pride that I can't quite put into words. The counters are covered in flour, trays of pastries cool on the racks, and the team I've hired works with the same care and passion I've always brought to my craft. It's not just a business anymore. It's a labor of love, one I've nurtured from the ground up. Looking back, I realize how much my family's betrayal shaped me. For a long time, I carried the weight of their actions, letting their greed and manipulation overshadow my achievements. But over time, I've come to see their betrayal not as an ending, but as the catalyst for a new beginning. My relationship with them is distant now, and I've made peace with that. We're polite at the rare family gatherings we still attend, exchanging superficial pleasantries that neither side really means. My mom will occasionally ask about the business, her tone carefully casual, but I keep my answers vague. Emily, on the other hand, has stopped trying to reach out altogether. I think she finally understands that there's no going back to the way things were. Whatever bond we might have had as sisters is gone, replaced by a polite indifference. As painful as their betrayal was, it taught me lessons I wouldn't trade for anything. It taught me to trust myself, to value my worth, and to never let anyone take advantage of my hard work again. They showed me how resilient I am, how capable I am of rebuilding, even when it feels like everything has been taken away. To anyone who's been betrayed, let me say this. Sometimes losing everything is the best thing that can happen to you. It's not easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, days when I doubted I'd ever recover. But starting over gives you a chance to rebuild something stronger, something that reflects who you truly are. And when you do, your success will speak louder than their betrayal ever could. Standing behind the counter at Haven and Hearth, I see it every day in the faces of my customers. The joy on a child's face as they bite into a cookie, the gratitude of a bride picking up her wedding cake, the quiet satisfaction of a regular enjoying their morning coffee with a perfectly flaky croissant. These moments are why I do this. They're my reminder that I didn't just rebuild a bakery. I rebuilt my dream, and this time, no one can take it from me.